had always prided myself on being a rational man. My job as an auditor required it, after all. Numbers don't lie, and neither do I. That's what I used to say, at least. But everything changed when we moved into that house in the quiet suburbs, a place that promised tranquility and a fresh start for my wife Claire and our daughter Sophie. The house was modest, built in the 1960s with a charm that hinted at better days. It was the kind of place where you could hear the laughter of children long grown and gone, echoed in the creaking floorboards and the gentle sway of the trees in the backyard. We settled in quickly, falling into the comforting rhythm of suburban life. Sophie loved her new room, where the sunlight filtered through the curtains in a way that made everything seem golden. It was during one of those lazy weekends, when I was sorting through boxes in the attic, that I found them, a dusty cardboard box tucked away in a corner, its contents hidden beneath a thin veil of neglect. Inside were dozens of VHS tapes, unmarked except for the dates scribbled on their spines. The years spanned from 1995 to 2001. These tapes were out of place, remnants of the past intruding on our present. Curiosity bested me. I dusted off an old VHS player I had found alongside the tapes and hooked it up to the small TV in the attic. The screen flickered to life, and I inserted the first tape. Static crackled, and then the image clarified. It was our living room, though subtly different. The wallpaper had since been changed, and the furniture replaced. Shadows danced across the walls as the camera, presumably handheld, panned around the room. The footage was mundane at first, a family gathering, children playing, a birthday party in full swing. But there was something off about it, an unsettling quality I couldn't quite place. And then I saw them, a pair of eyes reflecting the camera's light, peeking from a narrow gap in the basement door. They vanished as quickly as they appeared, but not before sending a chill down my spine. I chalked it up to a trick of the light, perhaps an artifact of the aging tape. I continued watching, tape after tape, each revealing more of the previous occupants' lives. There was joy and laughter, but also arguments and whispered conversations caught on film. Through it all, the same pair of eyes appeared intermittently, always watching from some concealed vantage point. I didn't mention the tapes to Claire or Sophie. How could I, when there was nothing concrete to tell? They were just recordings after all. Yet, the feeling of being watched began to gnaw at me, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The first real disturbance occurred a week later. Claire had taken Sophie to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. I planned to catch up on work, but my curiosity drew me back to the tapes. It was late, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional groan of the wind against the window panes. I was watching a tape from 1997, the camera focusing on the backyard. A family barbecue was underway, laughter and chatter filling the air. Suddenly, the screen glitched, and the scene changed. It was still the backyard, but the family was gone. The camera zoomed in on the far corner of the yard where the woods began. Through the pixelated image, I could make out a figure standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the encroaching darkness. I paused the tape, inspecting the figure. It was a man, his features obscured by shadow. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge the camera. He simply stood there, a silent guardian of some forgotten secret. A shiver ran down my spine, and I turned off the TV, leaving the attic in haste. Downstairs, I poured myself a drink, trying to shake off the unease. Outside, the trees rustled, and I imagined that figure watching me from the woods. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing but darkness. By the time Claire and Sophie returned, I had convinced myself it was all in my head. I was working too much, I told myself, letting my imagination run wild. But the feeling of being watched persisted, an uninvited guest that lingered just out of sight. Things escalated when Sophie started mentioning her invisible friend. At first, Claire and I dismissed it as a phase. Children often create imaginary companions, especially after a move. But Sophie's descriptions grew increasingly detailed and unsettling. She said he was a tall man who wore a hat, and that he liked to stand in the corners where the light didn't reach. I asked her about him one night as I tucked her into bed. Her eyes were wide, innocent, yet there was a gravity in her voice that unnerved me. "He watches us when we sleep," she said, as if stating a simple fact. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it, to attribute it to a child's overactive imagination. But the tapes haunted my thoughts, and the eyes those eyes felt all too real. One evening, when Claire was out with friends and Sophie asleep in her room, I returned to the tapes. I had to know more, to find some explanation for the disturbing images that filled my mind. I watched tape after tape, the years passing by in a blur of static and shadow. And then I found it. The tape that changed everything. It was from 2001, the last in the box. The footage was erratic, the camera shaking as it captured incomplete scenes of the house. It felt like a farewell, a final glimpse into the lives that once filled these walls. As the tape neared its end, the camera turned towards a mirror. For a moment, it caught the face of the man holding it, a man with my face. I recoiled, heart pounding. It was impossible, a trick of the light or an uncanny resemblance, but as I stared at the screen, the man smiled, and I saw those eyes, my eyes, staring back at me. I didn't remember filming it. I didn't remember living in this house before. Yet, there was a familiarity in the scenes, a haunting echo of memories just beyond reach. The rational part of my mind screamed in protest, but something deeper, something primal, whispered that it was true. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, the room oppressive with the weight of revelation. That night, I dreamed of the Watcher, his eyes following me through a labyrinth of forgotten corridors. As the days turned into weeks, the lines between past and present blurred. I found myself retracing steps I hadn't taken, whispering conversations I didn't remember having. The tapes revealed nothing more, but their presence haunted me. A reminder of a life I couldn't recall. I began to suspect that the Watcher wasn't just a figment of my imagination, nor a remnant of the house's past. He was a part of me, a shadow of who I once was, or who I might become. I felt him in moments of stillness, his eyes watching from the edges of my vision. Claire noticed the change in me, her concern evident in the way she looked at me, the way she hesitated before speaking. I wanted to tell her, to share the burden of my discovery, but words failed me. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? The climax came on a stormy night, lightning flashing across the sky as the wind howled through the trees. The power flickered out, plunging the house into darkness. I'd been watching the tapes again, desperate for answers, when the screen went black. I sat there, heart pounding, as the shadows pressed closer. And then I heard it, a whisper, a voice calling my name. It came from the hallway, a soft, insistent murmur that beckoned me forward. I rose, drawn towards the sound, fear trailing like a phantom. In the darkness, I saw him, the tall man in the hat, standing at the end of the hall. His eyes glinted in the gloom, and I knew he had been waiting for me. In that moment, I understood that he was not here to harm me, but to show me something. something I had forgotten. I took a step forward, and then another, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. As I approached, the darkness seemed to swallow him, and I found myself alone in the hallway, a cold breeze brushing against my skin. When the power returned, the house felt different. The shadows receded, but I carried the weight of their presence within me. I didn't speak of the encounter, not to Claire, not to Sophie. It was a truth only I could bear, a secret etched into the fabric of my being. The lingering fear never truly left. It became a part of me, a constant reminder that some things are best left forgotten. I stopped watching the tapes, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of them. They remained in the attic, silent sentinels of a past that refused to be buried. I often catch myself staring out the window, eyes searching the darkness for a figure that may or may not be there. The watcher might be gone, but his presence endures, a reminder that the past is never truly past, and that we are all, in some way, being watched. I always considered myself the sort of person who thrives in the mundane rhythm of suburban life. My existence was a quiet hum, a gentle background noise that filled the space between sunrise and sunset. I lived in a cozy apartment nestled on a tranquil street, lined with oak trees that whispered secrets to each other in the wind. Each morning began with the same routine: a steaming mug of coffee, a browse through the morning news, and then the commute to my job at the local library. It was at the library that I felt most at home, surrounded by stacks of books, the smell of old paper, and the soft rustle of turning pages. My evenings were equally serene. After work, the walk back to my apartment was a time for reflection. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement, a comforting reminder of the stability of my world. Once home, I'd prepare a simple dinner, usually something involving pasta or rice, before settling in for an evening of reading or watching old movies. There was a small second-hand shop at the edge of town where I often rummaged for classic VHS tapes, delighting in the nostalgia of watching them on my old player. Life was simple, predictable, and I liked it that way. It was during one of my frequent visits to the second-hand shop that I stumbled upon the tapes. A dusty box sat inconspicuously on a shelf, its edges frayed and its contents hidden beneath a layer of neglect. Curiosity nudged me towards it, and as I lifted the lid, I saw the unmarked VHS tapes inside. There was something oddly compelling about them, a strange allure that drew me in. Despite their lack of labels or any indication of what they held, I purchased them, thinking they might be home videos, or perhaps a forgotten indie film collection. The evening I brought the tapes home, the sky was painted in hues of purple and pink, the dying light casting long shadows across my living room. I placed the box on the coffee table, its presence both intriguing and somewhat unsettling. After dinner, I decided to watch one of the tapes, hoping it would be something interesting to pass the time. I pushed the first cassette into the player and settled back onto the couch, the static hum of the TV filling the room. At first, there was nothing but a blank screen. I almost thought the tape was empty until faint whispers began to filter through the speakers, barely audible yet distinctly there. As the screen flickered, a grainy image emerged. A room not unlike my own, dimly lit and eerily familiar. The camera panned slowly, as if searching for something or someone. It was unnerving, but I couldn't look away. An hour slipped by without any significant change in the footage, just the slow, deliberate sweep of the camera and the continuous murmur of whispers. I felt a chill creep up my spine, an irrational sense of being observed. Shaking it off as late-night paranoia, I switched off the TV and went to bed, dismissing the experience as nothing more than a peculiar recording meant to be avant-garde or artistic. The next day at the library was like any other, yet I found my mind drifting back to the tapes. They occupied my thoughts, a persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. I told myself I was merely curious, that perhaps I was drawn to the mystery of the unknown. When I returned home that evening, the box waited for me, an unspoken invitation that I was compelled to accept. I played the second tape. This time, the whispers were clearer, as if the volume had been turned up just slightly. The camera, with its relentless movement, explored different corners of the room, lingering on objects that seemed to hold silent significance. A lamp, a chair, a window. There was a growing sense of anticipation, as though something lay just beyond the frame, hidden, yet palpably close. Days turned into a week, and each night I found myself watching another tape, each one building a narrative of unease. I couldn't quite explain it, but with each viewing I became more attuned to the subtleties within the recordings. The whispers seemed to speak in an ancient tongue, a language that tugged at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to understand. And then, one evening, as the tape played, something different happened. The camera stopped its aimless drifting and focused sharply on a shadow in the corner of the room. It was a fleeting glimpse, a suggestion of movement that sent a jolt of fear through me. The shadow shifted, almost imperceptibly, and the whispers grew louder. I fumbled for the remote, my heart pounding in my chest, and turned off the TV, my breathing shallow and rapid. I sat in the dark, trying to rationalize what I had seen, telling myself it was all in my head. But the unease lingered, a shadow of its own that followed me through the days. I began to notice changes in my apartment, small things that seemed out of place. Books I hadn't touched were slightly askew on their shelves. The curtains in my bedroom were drawn when I distinctly remembered leaving them open. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as forgetfulness, the result of stress or lack of sleep. Then came the night when I woke to find my apartment filled with the same whispers from the tapes. They were all around me, so close, yet elusive. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a presence, unseen but undeniably there. I reached for the light switch, half expecting to see nothing, half dreading what I might find. But the room was empty, unchanged, save for the oppressive feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the sensation that the tapes were somehow connected to these disturbances. They were more than just recordings. They were a doorway, a thin veil separating my world from another. The realization dawned slowly, settling over me like a shroud. I knew I had to get rid of them, but a part of me hesitated, drawn to the mystery that had ensnared me. Despite my reservations, I decided to take the tapes back to the shop, hoping to rid myself of whatever lingered within them. As I prepared to leave, a thought struck me. What if the shop wouldn't take them back? Or worse, what if getting rid of them changed nothing? The possibility filled me with dread, yet I couldn't let fear paralyze me. The following morning, I carried the box to my car, each step fraught with an inexplicable heaviness. The drive to the shop seemed longer than usual, each stoplight a delay in what felt like an urgent mission. When I finally arrived, the shop was closed, a small sign in the window indicating it wouldn't open until later. Frustrated, I returned home, the tapes still in my possession. Their presence a weight I couldn't escape. That night, the whispers returned louder than before, persistent and insistent. I moved through my apartment, searching for the source, my heart racing with each step. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak of the floor a sign of something lurking just out of sight. When I reached the living room, I found the TV on, flickering with static, though I hadn't turned it on. With trembling hands, I ejected the tape, determined to end this. But as I did, the whispers crescendoed, filling the room with a cacophony of sounds. And then I saw it. A figure, a dark silhouette against the wall, its form indistinct yet horrifyingly real. It moved towards me, slow and deliberate, its presence a tangible evil that froze me in place. I wanted to scream, to flee, to do anything but stand there, yet my body refused to obey. The figure loomed closer, and as it did, the whispers transformed into words, clear and resonant, speaking in a language I had never heard yet understood instinctively. They spoke of loneliness, of hunger, of longing for a place beyond the tapes. In that moment, the realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I was the one who had opened the door, who had allowed this entity into my world. Panic surged through me, and with it, a desperate resolve. I grabbed the tapes and ran, the whispers chasing me as I fled into the night. The figure, a shadow at my heels. I drove without direction, needing only to escape, to distance myself from the thing I had unwittingly welcomed. When I reached a desolate stretch of road, I pulled over, the engine still running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew what I had to do. With a mixture of fear and determination, I stepped out of the car, the box of tapes clutched in my arms. The night was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. As I opened the trunk, the feeling of being watched intensified, a pressure that bore down on me, urging me to stop, but I wouldn't allow this entity to follow me any longer. One by one, I hurled the tapes into the darkness, each one a release of the fear that had gripped me. When the last tape had vanished into the night, the whispers ceased, leaving behind a profound silence. I stood there trembling, waiting for something to happen, for the figure to appear, for the nightmare to continue. But nothing came. Slowly, the oppressive feeling lifted, the air clearing as though a storm had passed. I drove home in a daze, the events of the past weeks a blur in my mind. My apartment was unchanged, yet everything felt different, as if a weight had been lifted. The fear, however, lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that refused to fade completely. I knew that the tapes were gone, yet I couldn't shake the sense that their influence might still linger. In the days that followed, I returned to my routines, each day a small step towards normalcy. At the library, I found solace in the familiar, the steady rhythm of work, a balm for my frayed nerves. Yet at night, when the world was quiet and still, I would sometimes hear a whisper, soft, distant, a reminder of what had been. And so, life continued, the tapes a memory that haunted the edges of my consciousness, a lesson in the dangers of curiosity and the unseen. I never returned to the second-hand shop, never sought to uncover the origins of the tapes or the entity they harbored. Some mysteries, I realized, were best left unsolved. I had worked as a maintenance technician in the government building for nearly a decade. Nestled in the heart of the city, it was a monolithic structure of administrative efficiency and bureaucratic whispers. Each day I would make my rounds, checking the heating systems, inspecting lighting fixtures, and ensuring the smooth operation of the building's many mechanical veins and arteries. It was a life of routine and predictability, the kind of work that allows a person to slip into a state of comfortable anonymity, unremarkable and unnoticed. The building was a maze of corridors and offices, bustling with the hurried footsteps of officials and the muted clatter of bureaucratic machinery. Its walls held secrets, no doubt, but none that had ever concerned me. I kept to the background, an invisible observer, diligently performing my duties and leaving the intrigue to those with more ambition or curiosity. The rhythm of daily life was my symphony, and the hum of fluorescent lights my lullaby. One evening, as I was finishing up a late shift, I came across a memo tucked beneath a stack of forgotten files in the maintenance office. A request had been made for someone to inspect the old archive room in the basement, which had long since fallen into disuse. It was an odd request, as no one had mentioned needing anything from those dusty shelves in years. The room was a relic of an era before digitalization, housing rows of metal cabinets filled with paper records. Though curiosity nudged at the edges of my mind, I dismissed it. My task was merely to ensure the room was secure and free of hazards. I resolved to check it first thing the next morning. The next day, I descended the narrow stairwell to the basement. The air was cooler there, tinged with the musty scent of aged paper and rusted metal. The archive room was situated at the end of a dimly lit corridor, its door marked by a peeling sign that simply read, "Records." I unlocked the door and swung it open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. The room was exactly as I had imagined, filled with rows of filing cabinets, their surfaces coated in a fine layer of dust. A single window, covered by a heavy blind, allowed a sliver of light to pierce the gloom. I flicked on the fluorescent lights, which flickered reluctantly to life, casting harsh shadows across the floor. As I began my inspection, I noticed an ancient television and VCR unit perched atop a rickety table in the corner. The equipment seemed out of place, an anachronism even in this room of forgotten relics. My eyes were drawn to a single videotape resting next to the VCR, marked with a simple label, 4-hour tape. It seemed harmless enough, and yet an inexplicable dread simmered beneath my curiosity. Perhaps it was the strangeness of finding such a thing in a neglected corner of the building, or maybe it was the ambiguity of its label. Whatever the reason, I felt compelled to view it. I inserted the tape into the VCR and turned on the television. The screen hummed with static for a moment before resolving into an image. The footage was grainy and monochromatic, depicting a single room, a simple, nondescript space furnished with a table and chair. The camera was fixed, unblinking, at the table where a man sat alone. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and deep-set eyes. There was something unsettling about his demeanor, a stillness that seemed at odds with the restless energy of the world outside. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the television and the rhythmic ticking of a clock somewhere off-screen. The man stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if waiting for something. For the first hour, nothing happened. The man remained motionless, and I found myself lulled into a trance by the monotony. But as the second hour began, a subtle change occurred. The man's eyes shifted, glancing around the room with a growing intensity. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm against the tabletop. I leaned closer, entranced by this subtle shift. The third hour brought with it an escalating tension. The man began to speak, though I could not hear his words. His lips moved silently, shaping sentences that seemed to echo within the confines of his own mind. I felt a chill creep down my spine, as if his silent soliloquy was meant for me alone, a message from the shadow. By the fourth hour, the transformation was complete. The man's demeanor had changed entirely, his face contorted with an expression of pure terror. He clutched at his head, as if trying to hold back some unseen force that threatened to overwhelm him. His silent screams filled the room, a haunting ballet of madness and despair that played out before my eyes. And then, without warning, the screen went black. The tape ended, leaving me in the oppressive silence of the archive room. I sat there for a moment, stunned and shaken by what I had witnessed. The image of the man's tortured face lingered in my mind, an indelible mark on the canvas of my thoughts. Over the following days, I could not shake the feeling that the tape held some deeper significance. The man's ordeal gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, an enigma demanding to be solved. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in that room, with the man whose terror had become my own. I began to research, sifting through the building's records and archives, searching for any mention of the tape or the man who had appeared in it. The task consumed me, leaving little room for anything else. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but I waved off their concerns with assurances that all was well. As I delved deeper, I uncovered fragments of information that hinted at a conspiracy. The man on the tape had once worked in the building as a mid-level bureaucrat, unremarkable and unnoticed, much like myself. His name was Edward Sinclair, and he had vanished without a trace several years ago. Official records indicated that he had resigned, but there were whispers of something darker, rumors of classified projects and forbidden knowledge. I tracked down former colleagues of Sinclair, each conversation yielding little more than vague recollections and vague unease. It was as if his memory had been scrubbed clean, leaving only the faintest outline of his existence. But one thing became clear. Sinclair had been involved in something secretive, something that had driven him to madness. My investigation had not gone unnoticed. I began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, a growing paranoia that shadowed my every step. The building, once a place of routine and predictability, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets and surveillance. My every move was watched, my every word measured against some invisible standard. The pressure mounted, an invisible vice squeezing the air from my lungs. Sleep became elusive, haunted by nightmares of Sinclair's tortured face. I could feel the edges of my sanity fraying, unraveling like a worn thread caught on a jagged edge. One night, as I pored over documents in the flickering light of my desk lamp, a realization struck me. The tape was more than just a recording. It was a key, a portal to hidden knowledge that had consumed Sinclair and threatened to do the same to me. The tape was a test, a gauge of one's ability to withstand the weight of forbidden truths. In a moment of clarity, I understood what I had to do. I packed a bag, filled it with only the essentials, and left it by the door. I had no concrete plan, only a desperate need to escape the building and the madness that lurked within its walls. But before I could leave, I had to watch the tape one last time. I needed to understand, to see if there was something I had missed. I returned to the archive room, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I inserted the tape once more and pressed play. The familiar scene appeared on the screen. Sinclair sitting at the table staring into the void. I watched, my eyes glued to the screen, searching for answers in the silent ballet of his descent into madness. As the hours passed, I felt myself slipping into a trance, my consciousness merging with the flickering images. I was no longer an observer, but a participant, drawn into the world of the tape, feeling Sinclair's terror as if it were my own. And then, as the tape reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment I glimpsed a new image, a face, indistinct and shadowed, yet undeniably familiar. It was my own. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave, a realization that sent a shudder through my entire being. The tape was not just a recording of Sinclair's madness, but a window into my own future. A warning of what awaited those who dared to seek the forbidden knowledge it contained. I tore my gaze from the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in with a suffocating weight. I stumbled back, my mind reeling from the implications of what I had seen. I fled the building that night, leaving behind everything I had known. As I walked the empty streets, the cool night air offered a welcome reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere of the government building. Welcome, Mike. But even as I put distance between myself and that place, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the tape's influence followed me like a shadow. In the days that followed, I tried to rebuild my life, seeking solace in the mundane and the familiar, but the memory of the tape lingered. A ghostly presence that haunted my every waking moments. I saw Sinclair's face in my dreams, heard the silent echo of his screams in the quiet moments of the day. The knowledge I had gained was a double-edged sword, a burden that I could not share. I had glimpsed the abyss, and it had looked back at me. I understood now why Sinclair had been driven to madness, why the tape had been hidden away in that forgotten corner of the building. The 4-hour tape was a test, a challenge to one's sanity and resolve, and though I had emerged from its depths with my mind intact, I knew that I could never truly escape its grasp. The secrets it contained were a curse, a legacy that I carried with me wherever I went. Even now, as I write these words, I feel the weight of that knowledge pressing down upon me. The conspiracy that had ensnared Sinclair had claimed another victim, and I was left to grapple with the consequences. The 4-hour tape had shown me the truth, and it was a truth I could never unsee. I live my life now in quiet solitude, forever wary of the shadows and the secrets they conceal. I know that there are others like me, those who have glimpsed the forbidden knowledge and survived to tell the tale. We are bound by an unspoken understanding, a shared awareness of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of our reality. The 4-hour tape is gone, its physical form lost to time and the shifting sands of memory, but its legacy endures. A silent echo that reverberates through the corridors of my mind. I am left with only my words, a testament to the madness that lies beyond the veil of the known. And though I may never find peace, I take solace in the knowledge that I am not alone. Somewhere out there, others are watching, waiting, and listening for the whispers of the truth that the 4-hour tape has revealed. Together we stand at the precipice, staring into the abyss, and wondering what lies beyond. The island was a distant dot on the horizon when I first spotted it, a solitary mass of land surrounded by the endless expanse of ocean. As our small research vessel approached, the facility came into view. A stark labyrinth of metal and glass, seemingly out of place amidst the untouched beauty of the island. This was to be my home for the next year, a place where I hoped to uncover the secrets of its abandoned halls. My purpose here was straightforward, to catalog and retrieve any valuable research left behind by the previous occupants. Years ago, this facility was a bustling hub of scientific inquiry, but it was abandoned abruptly. Official records were scant, only hinting at the unforeseen events that had led to its closure. Something about the facility piqued my interest, a magnetic pull that I couldn't quite rationalize. As I settled in, I found the facility to be eerily pristine, as though it had been abandoned just yesterday. Everything was in place, from the untouched equipment that lined the laboratories to the personal belongings scattered across the residential quarters. The only thing missing was the people. The silence was profound, almost tangible, wrapping around me like an invisible fog as I roamed the halls. For the first week, my days were spent in relative normalcy. I began to document the findings meticulously, each discovery a small piece in an unfinished puzzle. The isolation was palpable, but not entirely unwelcome. It allowed me to focus. Yet, beneath the surface of my activities, a subtle tension began to build. The kind that prickles the skin and whispers that not all is as it seems. It started with the monitor in my quarters. I had noticed it the day I moved in. An obsolete, bulky thing that sat on a corner desk, seemingly out of place in an otherwise advanced facility. At first, it was just a piece of furniture, a relic of past technology. But one night, as I was preparing to sleep, the screen flickered to life. I froze, heart pounding against my ribs. A grainy, monochrome image filled the screen. It was a hallway outside my room. The realization that I was being watched was a jolt to my system, but I quickly rationalized it. Perhaps it was some form of security protocol, an automated system that had reactivated for reasons unknown. Yet, where was the source of this feed? And why now, after days of inactivity? I dismissed the unease, convincing myself it was a technical glitch. However, the seed of suspicion had been planted. The next few days brought a sense of unease that shadowed my every move. I began to notice the monitors in other rooms, each flickering to life as I entered. They all displayed similar feeds: empty hallways, deserted laboratories, silent corridors. The facility was watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led somewhere, though I knew not where. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon one evening, the atmosphere thickened with an unshakable tension. The monitors in the main control room, usually dark and unresponsive, suddenly glowed, flooding the room with an eerie light. I stood before them, captivated and unnerved by the symmetry of their activation. They displayed various parts of the facility, all empty, all devoid of life. It was as though the building itself was a sentient entity, breathing and observing through these electronic eyes. In the days that followed, my presence in the facility began to feel less like work and more like an ongoing psychological test. I couldn't shake the sensation of being manipulated, as if some unseen force was guiding my actions, dictating my movements. The island, with its lush greenery and tranquil beaches, had transformed into a vast, open prison. My dreams grew restless, filled with shadowy figures and whispering voices that echoed through the night. I would wake at odd hours, drenched in sweat, my heart racing without reason. It was during these nights that I began to question my resolve. Was I truly alone, or was there someone or something lurking just beyond my perception? The facility's layout was a maze of corridors, each turn leading to new discoveries. Yet, I found myself inexplicably drawn to certain areas, compelled to explore them despite an internal warning screaming at me to stay away. One such place was the Central Research Lab. Unlike the other rooms, its heavy doors were sealed shut, as if protecting some vital secret. For days, I tried everything to gain access, but it was only when I stopped trying that an unseen hand seemed to guide me to the right sequence of steps that caused the doors to finally groan open. Inside, the lab was a frozen moment in time. Papers were scattered across desks, and an array of monitors lined the walls, each one dark and lifeless. As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed something odd. One monitor, separate from the others, was turned to face a small enclosed space at the back. Its blank screen was disconcerting, as though waiting for something. or someone to bring it back to life. On a whim, I powered on the monitor. It flickered to life, revealing a live feed of the room I was standing in, but the angle was wrong. It showed me from above, as though viewed from a vantage point I couldn't locate. My blood ran cold as I realized the implication. There was another camera somewhere hidden, tracking my every move. The fear that followed was a living entity, wrapping around my heart and squeezing tight. Every shadow became a threat, every sound a possible intruder. The psychological strain became unbearable, pushing me to the brink of sanity. I began to speak aloud, if only to break the oppressive silence. I begged the building for answers, for some understanding of the events that were unfolding around me. It was during one of these desperate monologues that I heard it, a soft, repetitive beeping from a hidden corner of the room. Following the sound, I discovered a control panel half buried beneath a mound of old equipment. My hands shook as I activated it, revealing a series of logs and video feeds dating back to before the facility's abandonment. The logs were a chilling testament to the unraveling minds of those who had come before me. They spoke of experiments spiraling out of control, of researchers succumbing to paranoia and fear. The video feeds, grainy and distorted, showed figures darting through corridors, their faces twisted in terror, and always the monitors watched, silent sentinels, recording everything. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The facility had been designed as a research outpost, yes, but its true purpose was far darker. They had been studying the effects of prolonged isolation and surveillance on the human psyche, a cruel and unforgiving experiment, with no concern for the mental degradation it caused. The researchers had become the subjects, their own minds the playground for unseen forces. In a moment of clarity, I realized the experiment was still ongoing. The facility hadn't been abandoned. It had been left operational, a trap set to ensnare the unwary, drawing them in with promises of discovery and knowledge. And now I was part of it, my own mind being twisted and warped by the same forces that had claimed the others. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to find a way out. But the island was as unforgiving as the facility. Every attempt to leave was thwarted by unpredictable weather, by the stubborn refusal of the boat to start. It was as though the island itself was conspiring against me, determined to keep me within its grasp. As days bled into weeks, the facility's hold on me tightened. I became a shadow of my former self, a prisoner of my own mind, trapped in a cycle of fear and paranoia. My only companions were the monitors, their unblinking eyes forever watching, forever recording. The climax came on a storm-ravaged night, when the power flickered and died, plunging the facility into darkness. I stumbled through the corridors, guided only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the way. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. In the control room, the monitors were dead, their screens blank and lifeless. Yet, I felt their presence more acutely than ever, a chilling reminder of the invisible chains that bound me to this place. I screamed into the void, a primal cry of defiance and despair, but the only response was the mocking echo of my own voice. The storm passed, and with it, the last remnants of my hope. I was left alone in a world of shadows, where every corner held a secret, and every secret was a reflection of my own fears. The facility had claimed me, as it had claimed those before, and I was powerless to resist. As I sit here now, writing these words, I feel the weight of the monitor's gaze upon me. They are silent, but their presence is a constant reminder of the island's true nature. A place of observation, of manipulation, where the boundary between watcher and watched blurs into oblivion. I am alone, yet I am not. The facility breathes with me. Its rhythms synchronize with my own. And though I long for the day I can leave this place behind, I know in my heart that I am forever connected to it, bound by the invisible threads of a nightmare that refuses to end. The Cerulean Institute stood on the outskirts of the city, an imposing structure with its endless corridors and sterile laboratories. It was a place that thrived on order and precision, where the air was perpetually infused with the smell of antiseptics and the hum of fluorescent lights. I had taken the job as a custodian, lured by the promise of a steady paycheck and the ease of night shifts that left the building devoid of its usual hustle and bustle. To me, it was a sanctuary of solitude, a perfect escape from the chaos of the outside world. My duties were simple: mop the floors, empty the bins, ensure that the labs were ready for the next day of groundbreaking research. The scientists seldom acknowledged my presence, engrossed in their pursuits of knowledge that often bordered on obsession. It was a relief, in a way, to fade into the background, to be part of the faceless machinery that kept the Institute running smoothly. For months, the routine was unbroken. I would arrive at dusk, don my uniform, and begin my rounds. The echo of my footsteps was my only companion, but I found comfort in their rhythmic certainty. Each corridor, each room was a chapter in a silent story that I was too insignificant to understand. One evening, as I was emptying trash bins in the East Wing, I noticed a door ajar. It was unusual. The scientists were meticulous, and every door was always securely closed to protect their secrets. A ribbon of light spilled into the hallway, drawing me towards it with an inexplicable pull. Inside, the lab was unlike any I had seen before. The walls were lined with shelves, each brimming with peculiar instruments and jars filled with preserved specimens. At the center was a large metal table, upon which lay a collection of notebooks, their pages filled with frantic scrawlings and complex diagrams. Curiosity, that sly serpent, urged me to step inside. I picked up one of the notebooks and began to flip through the pages. The writing was chaotic, almost as if it had been penned in a feverish haste. Words like transmutation, consciousness, and soul extraction leapt out at me, sending a chill down my spine. It was then that I heard the sound. A faint, rhythmic tapping, as though something was knocking from within the walls. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, waiting for the noise to abate. But it continued, persistent and deliberate, a heartbeat in the silence. In the days that followed, the tapping became my constant companion. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible noise that could easily be dismissed as the creaks and groans of an aging building. Yet, its presence lingered, whispering to me from the shadows. The scientists remained oblivious, their attention consumed by their work. I watched them with a growing sense of unease, noting how their eyes seemed to gleam with a feverish intensity. There was an energy in the air, an undercurrent of something unspeakable that thrummed against the surface of normalcy. One night, as I was cleaning the West Wing, I ventured into an area I had never been assigned. The corridor was dimly lit, the walls lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women. At the end of the hallway stood a door marked "Restricted Access." Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn to it, compelled by a force I could neither identify nor resist. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the tapping, louder now, insistent. A shiver ran through me, a cold breath against the nape of my neck. I knew it was wrong, but I needed to understand, to unravel the mystery that had begun to consume my thoughts. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was vast, its high ceilings lost in shadow. In the center stood a large glass chamber, wires snaking from its base like tendrils. Inside the chamber was a figure, human in shape, but otherworldly in presence. It was translucent, its form shifting and undulating as if made of mist. I stared, transfixed by the entity within. It seemed to regard me with an intelligence that was both ancient and alien. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a profound silence that pressed against my ears. As I watched, the figure extended a hand, its fingers brushing the glass. A warmth spread through me, a gentle probing that reached into the recesses of my mind, unlocking doors that had long remained sealed. Memories flooded back, moments of joy, of sorrow, of forgotten dreams and aspirations. The connection was overwhelming, an intimacy that transcended physical boundaries. I felt exposed, my very essence laid bare before this enigmatic being. And in that moment, I understood the truth that had eluded me. The scientists were not merely experimenting. They were communing with something beyond human comprehension. The realization was shattering. I staggered back, my mind reeling from the implications. The figure in the chamber began to dissipate, its form unraveling like smoke on the wind. As it vanished, the tapping resumed. A farewell echo that reverberated through my bones. I fled the room, heart hammering in my chest, the weight of what I had witnessed pressing down upon me. The Institute, once a haven of order, had become a labyrinth of madness, a place where science danced on the edge of the abyss. I tried to return to my routine, to banish the memories to some forgotten corner of my mind. But the Institute had changed, and so had I. The tapping became a constant reminder of the unspeakable horrors that lurked beneath the veneer of normalcy. The scientists continued their work, oblivious to the storm brewing within their walls. I watched them with a growing sense of dread, wondering how long it would be before their pursuits led to their undoing. The nights stretched on, each one an eternity of silence and shadows. I became like a ghost, drifting through the corridors, haunted by the knowledge of what lay beyond the veil of reality. And then, one night, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, a void that swallowed all sound. I felt its absence keenly, a wound that refused to heal. I knew then that the Institute had become a place of nightmares, a precipice on the brink of collapse. The figure in the glass chamber had been a warning, a glimpse into the chasm of oblivion that awaited those who dared to defy the natural order. As dawn broke, I left the Cerulean Institute for the last time, the weight of its secrets pressing heavily upon me. I knew that I could never return, that I had glimpsed too deeply into the abyss. But the fear lingered, a shadow that followed me into the daylight. I could feel it, waiting for the moment when I would finally succumb to the madness that had taken root within me. The world outside the Institute seemed unchanged, oblivious to the horrors I had witnessed. Yet in the quiet moments I could still hear the tapping, the phantom echo that haunted my dreams. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that the Cerulean Institute would always be with me, a specter lurking in the corridors of my mind. The first time I saw the man with the red notepad, it was a day like any other. I was sitting in the sterile, white-walled break room of the government research facility where I worked, swirling the dregs of my coffee while gazing absently at the motivational posters on the wall. My colleagues were scattered about the room, some murmuring in low tones about the latest project deadlines, others absorbed in their phones. The air smelled of burnt coffee and faint antiseptic, a scent that had become as familiar to me as the ticking of the wall clock. The facility, nestled in a remote part of the country, far from prying eyes, was a sprawling complex of laboratories and administrative offices. Our research focused on the intersection of myth and psychology, a niche field to be sure, but one that held endless fascination for me. We sought to understand how ancient myths could influence the human psyche, and perhaps uncover why certain legends persisted through the ages. It was amidst this routine that I noticed him, a man, sitting alone at a table near the window, scribbling furiously into a red notepad. His presence was unusual, but not immediately alarming. He wore a plain black suit that seemed out of place, the contrast sharp against the white decor of the room. No one else appeared to notice him. He was a ghostly figure, peripherally acknowledged, like a shadow passing through sunlight. As I watched, something about his intense focus drew me in. The way his hand moved across the page, fast and precise, seemed almost mechanical. I found myself entranced, the chatter of my colleagues fading into the background. He never looked up, not even when the doors swung open or closed, when laughter erupted, or chairs scraped against the floor. Few of the Data-Right's sight seemed to move faster than it swept through the break ended, and the usual bustle resumed as everyone returned to their desks and lab stations. I lingered a moment longer, casting a glance back at the man with the red notepad. He continued writing, oblivious to the world around him. Shrugging off the odd encounter, I returned to my work, convinced it was nothing more than an anomaly in an otherwise predictable day. As the day slipped by, the man became a fixture of the break room. As the days slipped by, the man became a fixture of the break room, always in the same spot, always with the same red notepad. Conversations around him flowed as if he were part of the furniture, unnoticed and unremarked. Yet for reasons I could not articulate, I was drawn to him, a moth to a flame. Each day I found myself stealing glances, growing increasingly obsessed with the figure who never seemed to move except to write. Then came the first disturbance. It was small, almost laughably so. I was in the lab, reviewing data from a recent experiment on ancient Celtic myths and their psychological effects. The results were promising, shedding light on the deep-rooted fears and archetypes buried within our collective consciousness. It was then that I heard a whisper, soft, insidious, slithering into my ear, as if carried on a phantom wind. "Beware the stories you tell," it said. I jerked my head around, searching for the source of the voice, but found nothing. My colleagues remained engrossed in their tasks, oblivious to the chill that now crawled up my spine. I shook it off as a trick of the mind, stress manifesting in strange ways. But the whisper lingered, echoing in the recesses of my mind. The following days brought more whispers, always the same phrase, always when I was alone. They grew more frequent, their presence a persistent hum beneath the facility's usual clap. I began to feel watched, as though unseen eyes tracked my every move. It unnerved me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity, though I told no one. How could I? It was just a voice, an auditory hallucination, nothing more. Still, the man with the red notepad continued to appear, his presence a constant, unwavering. I couldn't help but connect him to the whispers, though I had no evidence to support such a notion. The logical part of my brain dismissed the idea as absurd. Yet the whispers persisted, and with them, my growing unease. The situation escalated one evening as I stayed late, poring over data long after my colleagues had left. The facility was eerily quiet, the fluorescents casting shadows that flickered with every breath of the air conditioning. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on me, tangible and suffocating. I decided to take a break, clear my head, As I entered the break room, the man with the red notepad was there, sitting as he always did, but this time he looked up. Our eyes met, and I was struck by the intensity of his gaze, his eyes dark and fathomless like a void that threatened to swallow me whole. He smiled then, a small, knowing smile that sent a jolt of fear through my veins. I turned abruptly, intending to leave, but found that my feet wouldn't move. Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled against an invisible force. The room darkened around me, the fluorescent lights dimming until the only thing I could see was the man and his red notepad. He began to speak, his voice low and resonant, weaving a tapestry of words that filled the air. "They are more than stories," he intoned, "more than mere tales to be studied and dissected. They are alive, given form by belief, by fear, by the very act of telling them. Beware, for you tread on the edge of creation." I was frozen, caught in his words as if ensnared by a net. He continued, speaking of things beyond my comprehension, of worlds within worlds, of legends awaiting their moment to step into reality. Each sentence seemed to carve itself into my mind, leaving indelible marks that thrummed with a strange energy. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The lights flickered back to life and the man was gone. The room was empty, save for the faint echo of his voice that lingered in the corners, whispering secrets I couldn't grasp. I stumbled back to my desk, my heart pounding, mind reeling. Had I imagined it all? A hallucination brought on by too many late nights, too much caffeine? Yet, deep down, I knew it was real. The whispers were real. The man with the red notepad was real, and the warnings he gave were not to be taken lightly. In the days that followed, I withdrew into myself, wary of everything and everyone. The whispers ceased, leaving behind a silence that was almost worse. My work suffered, my focus shattered by the constant replay of the man's words in my mind. I became haunted by the thought that our research had somehow stirred something best left undisturbed. Something ancient and powerful. I began searching for answers in the myths we studied, poring over texts and records with a feverish desperation. I found references to beings that thrived on belief. Creatures that existed in the liminal spaces between reality and imagination. They were called many things in many cultures: tricksters, spirits, shadows, and they lived through the stories we told, shaping them as much as they were shaped by them. The legends warned of dire consequences for those who meddled too deeply, who sought to unravel the mysteries of their existence. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man with the red notepad was one such being, or perhaps a herald of their coming. But there were no concrete answers, only more questions, more riddles to unravel. The climax came one night when I was woken from a restless sleep by a loud crash. My heart raced as I lay in bed, straining to hear past the pounding in my ears. The noise came again, a shattering sound, as if glass were breaking. I bolted upright, fear coursing through me like ice. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony that filled the room. "You must stop," they said. "You must not let them out." I scrambled out of bed, drawn to my window by an inexplicable compulsion. Outside, the facility loomed in the darkness, its silhouette stark against the night sky. I could see lights flickering erratically within, shadows moving in ways they should not. It was as if the building itself were alive, pulsing with an energy that defied explanation. Without thinking, I dressed and rushed to the facility, my mind a chaos of fear and determination. The doors were open, swinging gently in the breeze, and the whispers guided me through the empty halls. urging me onward. I found myself back in the break room, and there he was, the man with the red notepad. He stood in the center, surrounded by a swirling mist that seemed to seep from the very walls. The notepad was open in his hands, and he looked up as I entered, his eyes burning with an otherworldly light. "You cannot control what you do not understand," he said, his voice resonant. "You sought to harness the power of legends, but they are not yours to command." A sudden clarity washed over me, and I understood. The research, the experiments, we had crossed a line, one that should never have been approached. The myths were not mere stories. They were alive, and we had given them form, a means to escape into our world. "You must choose," the man said, "to close the door you've opened or let them in." Faced with this terrible choice, I felt the weight of our folly, the hubris of thinking we could control the uncontrollable. With shaking hands, I reached out, my fingers brushing the notepad. The world around me seemed to tremble, the air thick with the potential of what we had unleashed. The whispers crescendoed, urging me to act, and I knew what I had to do. With a deep breath, I closed the notepad. The mist dissipated, the whispers faded into silence, and the man with the red notepad vanished, leaving only the echoes of his warning behind. In the aftermath, the facility returned to normal, the strange occurrences ceasing as abruptly as they had begun. But the knowledge of what lay beneath the surface, the awareness of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, remained with me, a constant reminder of the limits of human understanding. Even now, I can't escape the lingering fear, the sense that some doors once touched can never truly be closed. The man with the red notepad may be gone, but the stories, the legends, they endure, waiting patiently for their next opportunity to step into the light.